Welcome, everybody. My name's Craig Pearson, and I'm the SRE Chair for the DevOps Online Summit 2021. I'm sitting here today with Suresh, who will be sharing some excellent insights and inspiring ideas around SRE, in particular, how you would kickstart your SRE journey and some sharing of the experiences of that journey. So welcome, Suresh. Great to have you here today.
Thanks, Craig, and it's really an honor to be a part of the DevOps Online Summit. So I hope I can get this kick-started. So
it's good. Please do. So Suresh, maybe it's a good place to start would be for you to share your DevOps and SRE journey so far. So what got you to this point?
Sure. So I'm the Managing Director of Top Solutions. We are a consulting company focused on Agile, DevOps, Lean, IT service management implementations. Overall, 20 plus years in the industry. I'm also a global ambassador for DevOps Institute. And what we have seen, Craig, in the last 5 to 6 years, DevOps, we moved on from Agile to DevOps, and now the SRE is the new kid in the block. So we wanted to kind of venture this. In the last 2 years, we have been doing extensively some work on SRE. So that's what I wanted to share in today's presentation. Right? Overall 20 plus years in the industry, spent a lot of time on service management, Agile, DevOps. I'm also one of the top 25 influencers in service management for 3 consecutive years. And I'm also a recipient of the top 2021 BRM at BRM Institute. So what are we going to kind of cover today is a quick background and context. What's the scope of SRE that we went about implementing? So this is a real world experience of what we did in the organizations that we are working. Talking about something around service level agreements to service level objectives. How did we leverage on error budgets? What kind of toil did we look at across the end-to-end value stream? We are a big fan of incident management. We've been doing it for years. So how does that change gears when it comes to site reliability engineering? How did we go about organizing the team structure? That's a big question people ask. Hey, how do you work through this models where do I need to rebrand my production support team to SREs and stuff like that? It says, hold on, let's do it one step at a time. But also we learned some huge lessons that I wanted to kind of run through. So the background is, I think, helping clients and implement service site reliability engineering. It's not that every company can be Google. So I need to be very careful that just because Google did it in a certain way, everybody should do the same way. But there are principles and practices are pretty sound that you can actually leverage it, but you need to still use it with a pinch of salt. So I'm going to kind of share about what has been the experience. And over the last year and a half, we have had opportunity to connect with a lot of practitioners. And that's some of the learnings that you've got. So we have gained knowledge with the community as part. See, one of the biggest things that we had started off is how to scope your SRE journey. A lot of applications that exist today are either legacy infrastructure, they're a bit of cloud natives, and they always have this problem that should we onboard every application as part of SRE. Said, hold on, let's not boil the ocean. Let's focus on business critical applications. So we had to first do due diligence of which are the applications which are business critical. Again, criteria of business facing, how is the impact on downtime, understanding in terms of your background, in terms of legacy, interfaces, dependencies. So we had to do a bit of due diligence first, right? To look at a scope statement. And also the maturity of the systems. Because if you look at financial services, a lot of these systems are more homegrown mainframe systems and other stuff, which you cannot have a lot more changes that you can do, like an adapt and adopt part of it. And we also looked at their current level of availability quotient. So either it is on cluster hosted machines, availability that was on hand, and looking at what was important to be achieved from a redundancy. So we had to do this brainstorm sessions. Let's do a few applications onboard it, and then see whether it actually makes sense to do the SRE ways of working before we can kind of go to the next step. So it's very important and critical to pilot your scope before we get into aspects. And as you know, this is famous, but everybody have to focus on, before we even start SRE journey, there are certain prerequisites. Do you do the golden signals of monitoring? Because we have this notion that monitoring can cover everything. It's like a myth. So I tell that you have to focus on understanding how do you capture latency, the response time that you get from the time that you process a HTTP request to a retrieving back. What are kind of the error codes we have, the number of concurrent transactions, and your saturation in terms of utilization. So it's more important that every organization that starts in their journey at least have a good understanding about the four aspects of monitoring. These are prerequisites. And if you look at Mikey Dickerson's maturity model, monitoring is the basic, but we have to make sure that we have done all that is needed to leave no stone unturned in terms of monitoring. The second one I like about, and I tell people, is you have to change the perceptions of moving from SLAs and contractual obligations to something like SLO. Now, while SRE talks about user experience, people find it very difficult to articulate what does a user experience mean. So, Craig, I thought for the viewers, I would do it in a much more metaphorical example. How do you move from a watermelon? Well, in SLAs, everything is green as part of a dashboard, but I just open the watermelon, it's bleeding red, but the customer is bleeding because you measured either the wrong metric about availability and capacity, but what I really wanted was, can I fix this once for all? Not your temporary fixes. So the whole notion of shifting your paradigm from the concept of watermelon to kiwi, so both green, internal and external, was what we want to focus. So point in time, there's a lot of incidents that hit the service desk. So if you look at the starting point of how we operate today, someone calls up the service desk and say that, hey, something's broken. Can you fix it? Yeah, sure. You have a response time, work in progress, open to work in progress. And probably an hour's time, and you say you fix it. Great. Thanks. You make my day. The question is, between that 1 hour time, you have no idea what is going behind the scenes of the user. And I think that is so important, because XLA is talking about every touch point of the interface with your customer journey. And that's super important for us to look at beyond just response time and resolution time. That itself is a paradigm shift people do not know. How do we start your journey breaking down the customer journey map? Because just because your servers are fully healthy doesn't mean that I'm not able to access on my mobile device or tablet. So we need to think from the user perspective. So we came to the error budgets and we had a huge fight because everybody's saying, oh, error budget, quantifiable. We don't have budgets. They thought it was a risk budget that we are going to focus on. We don't have money. I said, it's not about that. It's a way to focus our effort to balance velocity and stability. Because traditionally, if you see, we have never allowed operations teams or production support team to experiment. Hey, don't touch it. Everything's working well. So don't even touch it. But now you're saying that I will give you a legitimate buffer. So if your SLO is about 96%, that 4% is what is your error budget, which you can willingly experiment. So people don't understand the notion of why we need to have error budget as a place. And the error budget is not just for the production support or the operations team, it's for the entire team. I tell this example of Samsung Galaxy Note issue where the battery gets burnt out. Now, would you blame that as a developer issue or a hardware issue or an operations or a QA? I mean, who cares? Customer doesn't really care about whether it's a developer or operations. It's a Samsung's issue. I think the whole notion of shared ownership is absolutely important because we don't have skin in the game. And I have this problem that we get different metrics. We don't have a shared metrics that we kind of run through. And that's why SLO is kind of bringing into it. And everybody talks about what is in for me. So if you don't have this common incentive for productized teams and SREs, they're not going to do that. And how do you prioritize capabilities? So our focus was to create a balance between reliability and feature innovation. The one thing that I really liked about the error budget is halting deployments. Every time the infrastructure team says that, oh, we need to halt the deployments, you know what? My system is not unstable. I don't care. We have a release next 2 weeks. We have to do it because this is what we committed to the customer. Now, there is no ownership because we have two different metrics. Now, for the first time, you take a step back and look at the whole value chain and say, what are we going to do now that gives us a common understanding for achieving that outcome? Well, that was a game changer because for the first time, people looked at the entire value chain and value stream. And that was something which was possible only because we had a skin in the game as part of error budgets. I tell people that even if you blow your error budget, it's okay. People get to the notion, no, I have to be within the error budget. if you start playing not to lose, you defeat the concept of error budgets. I say that you need to play to win, but if you lose, it's okay. Don't beat yourself to death. So these were some of the things we'll have to educate our people in terms of error budgets. Then our famous notion of toil came into limelight, because toil is one thing which we thought we have to embed as part of our backlog. So as we started to look like the aspect of product backlog, we also wanted every team in the value chain, the development, the testing, and every team to come back and say what aspect of toil within their group they're going to address as part of the sprint. For us, that is a very important part, including the functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and toil. So we wanted to start with some low-hanging fruits, because we saw we had a lot of flab in the systems when you have a distributed software environment. So the first thing was to look at, obviously, some kind of auto remediation. I tell that a human should not be the first point of contact for intervention. You need to have sophisticated things which probably will eliminate and then try to reduce a lot of manual effort. So we always have to do this alert and categorization, because, again, going back to event, information, warning, alert, we had to look at it and say, hey, are we categorizing it to the right level of thresholds? Because we had a lot of monitoring devices, we had the false positives. And we were struggling because tools like AppDynamics or Dynatrace has tons and tons of alerts, and you get overwhelmed by the whole thing. So we had to tweak a bit and said that, hold on, let's do one step at a time. And it became popular that we had a lot of requests coming through service desk, which was not registered at all. Because like a hard boot reset, you never had this in the incident record, and we were not able to track. So we said, why can't we now look at chatbots, where at least it will be the first level of support before we kind of get into registering an incident back into your aspect. And that's why we started off. And I did say the SREs don't need to do every task. Let's offload, right? That's the only way that you can free up your time, and then proactive alerts. So we looked at technical debt from a coding practice. So we looked at how to reduce technical debt, how to ensure refactoring within the sprint itself, because people want to have a sweet time to do refactoring. Essentially, you don't have a time to do all of this stuff. It has to be embedded as part of your sprint planning itself. We also ask these people, come on to a boardroom or a whiteboard where you can actually do re-engineering of process. Let's see what you can, each and every one of us can do to make a difference. So from a technical team, it was reducing technical debt. From a service management team, it was re-engineering process, because change management was becoming a bottleneck. Every change had to go through a approval process, which says that doesn't make any sense. How can you promote it to normal changes? So it could be pre-approved and can be released forward. And then happening this self-service model, which was very important for us to run through it. It's kind of a dashboard that you will see a lot of organizations have something in place to look at whether we are doing well in terms of the different SLOs that we are measuring. Right? It could be latency, response time, availability, error codes, and stuff like that. Now, we also have changed a dimension of moving from incident management, which is more reactive in nature, to proactive event monitoring, but also being predictive. So with observability and analyzing user data, we wanted to bring in that level of data analytics and intelligence that will help us to move this needle much more effective. We had to go to the level of granularity. And this was very difficult, because traditionally we only used to measure response time and resolution time. In between, there was nothing to be done. So we had to do some factoring, bring in a lot more additional things. And there was no one tool who could fit in everything. So how do we bring in interfaces, APIs, web services to do it? So it was a lot more effort. But I think we got to the hang, because you now know what else could go wrong from a predictability standpoint. And I think the team started to gain, because you have a lot of wisdom and production that has gained over a period of time that we could have leveraged. Right? Well, I cannot offer evidences of the cultural part of it. Every time you get into a retrospective, it actually becomes a fight game. And I've never seen someone actually holding up, because there is so much to talk about. So to get out and do a blameless postmortem, I like the word of how we do it, moving away from blamefulness to sense of ownership, being accountable, right? And no one is punished, right? We learn from the lessons and move on. I think that a considerable amount of time has to be spent on inculcating this as a culture from the leadership team. And you cannot afford to have anybody point fingers. You'll be thrown out of the room. if you start to blame. And there are some rules of the game. I call this the rules of the game. If you don't adhere to the rules of the game, you're knocked out of this whole episode. So we built this Rossi in also with BRM Institute. Like we have to move away from RACI, which is kind of streamlined, bounded towards what we call as a shared ownership, where each and every time together is responsible for the user experience to do it. The last couple of slides is from a team structure standpoint, we looked at productized because every team is a productized team. So we moved away from a project mindset to a product mindset, and then had the SREs get embedded into the part of the teams where they are cross-functional in nature. One person does not know everything, but they kind of learn from each other. But they get to kind of do dedicated effort. You cannot do multitasking, right? Like I like what Kanban board's aspect says that, stop starting, start finishing. So you need to take one step at a time, complete it, but make sure it is inclusive. And then we work through that model. And involving the SRE from the journey till the end, right? Of looking at reliability and resilience as a core component because it's going to make or break the user experience. And there's a lot of lessons we learned as part of the enterprise. So you have all of those stuff in terms of architectural design and other stuff that you can run through and part of a tool chain. So you need to decide which tool chain is appropriate on the CI/CD value stream. My last slide is summary of lessons learned. It is a marathon, but I'll pause here if you have any questions so far, and then we can run through the rest of one slide.
So Suresh, thanks for sharing that journey so far. I think it is tied into this slide to a certain extent because lots of organizations are seeing SRE as that new thing. As Agile and DevOps went before it, SRE is viewed as being something that can solve problems for an organization. But
Right.
We all know it's not plain sailing by any stretch of the imagination. You still need to invest time, effort, and in the learning and understanding and application of this new technique. What I wanted to try and draw out, if I could, from the journey you've been on, what would be the one major business highlight that SRE gave, and also what are the potential pitfalls that you need to watch out for on this particular journey?
Sure. That's a great question, Craig. Let me talk about one of the highlights of this whole thing. I call this as a marathon. Rome never gets built in a day. So I think we need to set the expectation. It's a journey, not a destination, right? You continually improve towards the path. So I'm a big fan of what Martin Luther King says. If you cannot fly, let's run. If you cannot run, let's walk. If you cannot walk, let's crawl. So we need to make that baby steps, take the iterative improvements to do that. So that's a very, very important part. And it is a journey where you have to do it together. I think one of the phenomenal reasons of success in any of the SRE engagements is when you actually get the entire enterprise inspired by the purpose in what you're driving and then moving it forward. Now, to the pitfalls, I think people take culture and people too much for granted. And they think that, oh, we are onboarded on SRE, let's all jump in. It doesn't work, right? Because you have not redefined metrics. You have not made a consensus of what is going to be the way SRE is going to work. How is it going to benefit me? What is it for me? So you need to be very careful in terms of giving that empowerment for the team. And one thing I've seen a problem in pitfalls is people are afraid for failures. And if you don't have a psychological safety environment, I don't think you're going to make it anywhere work around that. And the last was basically, we have our own siloed way of being agile DevOps lead. How do we build this network of connecting all the dots that these IT management best practices, all that they care is that as a business, I don't care about whether you follow agile, lean, DevOps, SRE, right? I want profitable growth, excellent customer experience, and customer retention. So as long as you deliver that, I'm okay. So we need to start to inculcate the business mindset, the business thought process. Then probably it changes the whole dimension of how we work.
Okay, thanks. I have one sort of related question. So obviously people will be joining this conference because they want to learn from previous people who have followed this journey towards SRE. So for anybody watching who is starting out of that on that journey, think back to when you started the journey. What would you do different now, knowing what you learned, and what would you tell others to do?
Well, I think that's a great question. It's a kind of a retrospective in, I think one thing is that what I've learned, and I think is that do not assume anything. Ask for help. Tell, I do not know. Sometimes, on a verge to prove yourself, you try to be that so good guy, so committed. Sometimes I would probably cry for help, because the earlier you do, you know that you're not alone. I think if I want to do something differently, I would start and say that I do not know when I start my journey. In that way, I'm open and receptive to new ideas that I can put into practice. And guess what? You have more smart people than you, and that you can leverage and start to grow. That's the only thing that I think will be there. And I definitely want to have another scenario where I will probably run through it. Cannot afford to have um, ego in
Yes.
some of these conversations. So these are two things I think we need to keep in mind to do it a little better the next time we get an opportunity to do an SRE engagement.
Fantastic, Suresh. Really pleased that you could share lessons learned from your journey with and towards site reliability engineering. I was going to say, where can people find out a bit more about you personally and the work that you're doing? So obviously on screen there, we're seeing your major connection details. Obviously the world in which we operate, and SRE is no different here, is constantly changing and evolving. So what one thing do you see on the horizon as being where SRE could potentially head in the future?
So I think one of the things that is going to change this thing is that we are going to move away from monitoring to a single source of truth called observability. And that's changing the whole dimension, which means you are going to feed in all the data sources, federated things to achieving something of observability of truth. But before that, we need to have your eyes and ears open to make sure that you fine tune all your base level things before you talk about flying. So there is a huge push towards moving towards observability and automated pipelines. But do not forget your basics. If you don't get your time spent on basics to make it at a certain level of degree, you cannot fly with your wings high enough. So that's my only request to all of the people. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn, social media. I'm pretty active on that, and also part of DevOps Institute ambassadorship. So there's more to talk, and feel free to reach out if I can be of any assistance.
Perfect. Suresh, thank you for being part of the 2021 DevOps Online Summit. It's been great talking with you today. My name is Craig Pearson. I've been your host for the SRE track. I look forward to seeing you all again. And one final thank you, Suresh. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Craig, for giving this opportunity. And thanks to the DevOps Online Summit, because by virtue of this being virtual, everybody is able to learn from experience. And I thank you so much and the organizations for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thanks. 3, 2, 1, and that will be our end.